Welcome to Perspectives, the vodcast of the American Mental Health Counselors Association with the National President and Interim CEO/ED, Dr. Beverly Smith. This vodcast will bring to you the perspectives of clinical mental health counseling as it pertains to ethics, public policy and legislation, multiculturalism and social justice, as well as leadership and advocacy. This vodcast will feature experts in the clinical mental health counseling field to enhance the work of clinical professionals and to inform the public. The American Mental Health Counselors Association advocates for over 130,000 licensed clinical mental health counselors in the United States who are licensed to assess, diagnose, and treat mental disorders. We are the only organization working exclusively for clinical mental health counselors. Join the Perspectives for insight from experts on wellness and daily living, current clinical research, integrative healthcare, as well as how to maintain personal, family, and organizational wellness in an anxious and ever-changing world. Let's connect and hear the perspectives.
Hello, I'm Dr. Beverly Smith, President and Interim CEO of the American Mental Health Counselors Association. This is another episode of our broadcast called Perspectives. And on our broadcast today, as a special guest, we have with us Dr. Haskins. Dr. Haskins is with the College of William and Mary. She is the current president-elect for the Association for Counselor Education and Supervision. She has 3 more weeks, and then she will be the president of AMHCA. We are glad that you're here with us today. If you can, introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about who you are.
Thank you so much, Dr. Smith. So happy to be with you today. So I am currently, like you said, I'm at the College of William and Mary. I am on faculty there, and I also serve as the Associate Dean and Director of Diversity and Inclusion. I have spent the last 12 years as a counselor educator. And prior to that, I was a school counselor. And so my love for this work really originated working with middle and high school students in the city of Richmond and providing support for underrepresented communities. And so that has continued into my work as a counselor educator and as a leader, and to focus primarily on issues of access and addressing diversity and equity in counselor education.
So it sounds like DEI work, multicultural and social justice, those are areas that you're very passionate about. You're very passionate. Can you tell us kind of how that happened? Did you happen to stumble upon it, personal experience, professional experience? You just looked up and there was a great topic to research and study and advocate for. Tell us, how did you get into the work of DEI?
Yeah, so I am a first-generation college student, and I would say, for the last probably 20 years, it really started when I was and really probably more than that, maybe like 25 years, when I was a high school student. And I did well as a high school student, but I had a school counselor who basically said that you are not going to be successful in college and that you should not apply to the universities that you're applying to, and consider applying to universities that aren't as rigorous, and or maybe even going to a community college, which, is perfectly okay, but that was not what I really wanted to do for myself. And so that experience really kind of set the stage for my feelings around advocacy and needing people in our schools to be able to advocate for Black and Brown students. Knowing that, you hear this a lot. You hear a lot of people talk about, I had a counselor who said, don't apply to this school, or that you're not going to be successful. You hear that, unfortunately, we hear it a lot from people of color. And so, for me, having that experience and also being a first generation college student, I always had this desire to want to create an environment, create spaces where Black and Brown students could be successful. And then when I went into counselor education, having an experience as a doctoral student, as a master's student, where many times I felt othered and I felt like the curriculum wasn't really designed to support me, that a lot of the experiences that students were having, in particular, students of color were having with faculty wasn't supportive, that they didn't really feel like when they graduated, they were positioned to hit the ground running. That they didn't have the research experiences, that they didn't have, opportunities to collaborate and present with their faculty. And so when they got the opportunity to move into a faculty position, they were playing catch up. And I know what that was like because I felt the same way. I was playing catch up. I was having to run 3 times as fast as my colleagues who had that support and that mentorship. And so a lot of that also comes out in the research that I do now around supporting doctoral students, supporting master students, creating environments for their success, and helping faculty learn how to do that, how to create those environments, what they can do in their classrooms, how they can teach, what types of content they can include.
And it sounds like then mentorship is extremely important, and not just blanket mentorship. I gave you a piece of advice, you receive it, you move on. But it's about the relationship. It's about understanding culture. It's about understanding experiences. It's about embracing your students, the other person. And that's important. And it sounds like, to me, from what you said, in my own experience, creating that environment that Black and Brown individuals do not have to check their experiences, their culture at the door, and then walk in and kind of get information.
Right. Absolutely. And, this notion of code switching, having to code switch in predominantly white environments. I mean, I went through all of my education was in predominantly white environments. And so you learn early on, like what you can say, how to say it, to be careful of your tone, all of those things, which, we know have a psychological impact. Like we have to be almost, like super hyper vigilant about how we show up, as opposed to just being able to be, and so, for me, it's been creating spaces where students can just be, but also helping faculty to see that, the notion of tone policing, which we know we talk a lot about now, is a way that can marginalize, and often does marginalize, certain communities, when you're, and then those communities feel like they cannot show up. And if they do, they are viewed as show up completely themselves. They are viewed as less than. They are viewed as not being as, intellectually savvy, not falling into this notion of this person isn't a born leader. But we know that a lot of times people are tapped for these positions, that you kind of get positioned, to move into these roles by having either mentorship, relationships with individuals, or sometimes even just putting yourself out there. But a lot of times there are connections that happen, that are, beyond your control, of like just the fact that you have this amazing leadership, ability.
So true. As you were talking, I thought to myself, I graduated from HBCU. I graduated from Tuskegee University 2 times. I've been went on to, PWIs. So in the initial phase of college, I didn't necessarily have those experiences, had other experiences, And so I think everybody may present it on it to celebrate, and also things to kind of readdress. But as we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, in this setting, I think everything that you said was right and correct. I'm not sure everyone is open to receiving that or understanding that, because oftentimes, if we're in a behavior habit of doing and being, regardless of it's negatively impacting someone else or not, we don't necessarily receive or understand the need to change or to shift.
Right.
And so,
and I think it also takes time. Like, I'm always mindful that a lot of what we're talking about right now and our experiences are not things that other people, in particular, communities that have not been exposed to issues of racism and discrimination and marginalization, it is not something that's in the forefront of their mind. Most European Americans have a different lived experience, and so while, you have situations where individuals mean well, they want, they say they want to support, they don't always know how to. They don't know what that looks like because they haven't really had to navigate it in the same way.
And they may not understand, but at the same time, we still need allies to do the work. We still need the allies to move forward. And you mentioned something earlier about, there are times that people are just tapped for certain things, and it may be outside of their control, but they benefit from it. And I think we have to acknowledge that, but also provide opportunities for other people of diverse cultures and backgrounds to be tapped, allow them to be in the space to network so that those things can happen. So that's important. Opportunity is important.
Yes. And that, kind of brings me to one of the initiatives that I am looking to really focus in on this coming year is around the pipeline issue for leadership. And, really looking at what our regions, not just at the national level, but our regional organizations can do to try to increase diversity and equity. One of the other things we're looking at doing is starting a leadership academy to support, in particular, women and individuals of color who don't always get the mentoring around moving into administrative level positions in counselor education, or even, leadership at, the organizational levels. And so those are things that, because we know that support.
You're on mute.
We know that support.
I think you're on mute.
Oh,
sorry. Okay.
We know that support isn't always rolled out, that we have to create those types of spaces where we can be intentional about providing mentorship, about providing those networking opportunities, and then also providing the actual paths, like here is an opportunity for you to apply to be X, Y, and Z, or here's an opportunity for you to go into, chairing of a department, if that's something that someone is interested in. And this is what needs to happen in terms of the process of getting from being a faculty member to becoming a department chair. So we almost have nothing available to people to provide that type of support.
But
so, yes,
I'm glad that you have that passion for it and you have a plan to make it happen, because all too often, sometimes I think we can have a lot of dialogue about it, but then actually having a plan in place that you can begin to outline and roll out and connect, build allies and make it happen. I think that's a critical piece in creating that pipeline that you mentioned.
Right. And I think too, it's the follow-up. One of the things that I always talk about with these leadership positions, especially these year appointments or these year elected positions, is that a lot of times you come in and maybe one person has these great ideas and they're trying to move initiatives forward. And then when that person moves out of office, it's, it may or may not persist. And so for me, it's not only trying to put some things in place, but also put things in place so that they can continue on. And that means, do we need financial support? What specifically in terms of resources are going to be needed that we can build into the budget from now on, so that it's not just this initiative that people are like, oh yeah, we thought it was happening. And when you don't have any financial connections, a lot of times with many organizations or entities, it can really just fade away, and, having people who actually want to do this work as well, who want to actually lead and facilitate these types of programs, is another piece of it, finding people that want to do that. because there isn't always a lot of compensation. You have to do this because you want to do it. Like you have a desire to really support communities that have been disenfranchised. So.
I think you're right. We have to have the passion for it, to do the work, and have the passion just to want to see people celebrate it and see people achieve and appreciate it. And I think that's important in doing it. Oftentimes a lot of the work that I've done, I haven't gotten compensated for it, but nevertheless, it doesn't mean the work didn't need to happen. It doesn't mean it doesn't need to continue. Now, operating off a shoestring budget is hard. Because we do need resources. We need the human capital, and we just need the money to move it forward. And so it's important to mention that. But creating allies and networking can be a source for that as well.
Yeah.
When we talk about DEI work and we talk about leadership, are there other signs or signals of effective leadership so that the work is being done?
I mean, for me, I consider myself a transformational leader, but I'm also someone that is on the ground. I am a servant leader. I think a lot of that comes from, so I have a background in theology. I'm a licensed minister and have, gone to seminary. And that, I think, guides a lot of the work that I do around leadership, so leading there in the trenches and walking alongside. And I think for a lot of leaders, it can be, I don't know, some of it may be cultural as well, but for me and how I, was raised and what I saw as models of leaders, they were the people who not only, yes, they were encouraging, they were motivating, but then they got into the work. They were actually on the ground making it happen, getting their hands dirty, for lack of a better word. And to me, when I think about doing DEI work, it's the people who are willing to get into the trenches, and not just talk about it like we were saying. Yeah, we have a lot of dialogue, but are you willing to get into the trenches? Are you willing to, maybe go a little bit outside of the status quo, because we know how that is too. To try to push us forward a little bit, because it requires all of us to move forward a little bit. Every time we get an opportunity to be, and I'm saying every time I'm talking about people who have a desire to really address issues of equity and social justice, every time we have an opportunity to be in leadership, I feel like it is really required that we push a little bit further. And if we continue to do that, then at some point we'll look back and we'll say, we've come, further than we thought we could have. And it, like I said earlier, it will take time. But, going back to your question, for me, it's always been someone that is willing to get into the trenches, someone that is modeling, that it's not just a role, if you look at someone's life, you see that this is something that matters to them in their life, not just like I'm in this position and now I'm going to do this, but this is something I value. And so it's going to show up in all parts of my, of my life, whether it be leadership or what have you. And then being open, because you don't know what you don't know. For me as a leader, I have to be open. There can never be a point where I'm like, I got it all and this is my vision and this is what we're going to do and I'm not going to listen to anyone else. You have to be willing to listen and adapt and, infuse other perspectives. I think that to me, when DEI leadership, because people are coming from so many different, ways of being and knowing that you have to be open to meeting people where they are.
And I agree, being open to meeting people where they are, but being accepting. But then at the same time, while we're doing that, having those necessary boundaries so that it doesn't sidetrack you if the intentions are not on point, if everyone is not trying to move in the same direction that you're going in. And so being able to address appropriate boundaries in an appropriate way. And also, I think it's being able to acknowledge when those who are going in the right direction or in the direction you're trying to move the organization and that's healthy, but then those who are not, then addressing that, but not being distracted at the same time because the work still needs to continue.
Absolutely.
You
Absolutely.
said a few minutes ago, which was really important. You said further than where we were. And that's part of, I think, of celebration points, but also just points to acknowledge along the way to keep you motivated, because the work may be hard, but as long as we're moving the needle and we're further than where we were,
Right,
we're benefiting and we're making progress. So that part is extremely, extremely good to understand.
yes,
And
yes,
to just receive it, because sometimes along the way, I know I have, when you're a leader, you're leading, and sometimes at the top now it can get kind of lonely at the top. So it's important to remind ourselves as leaders that, hey, are we making progress? Are we further along than where we were?
yes.
And that sometimes has to be the encouraging piece that we hold on to, that we hold on to. I want to shift and ask you another question, because we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and oftentimes we talk about it from the stance of maybe other people not understanding the plight of Black and Brown and so forth individuals. But if we shift a little bit and talk about diversity, equity, inclusion within the Black, Brown, or so forth community, we talk about diversity and understanding that and appreciating the differences that we have. What advice would you share within culture to celebrate and recognize diversity, equity, and inclusion?
I will say this, one of the things that I've observed, throughout my life, 40 plus years, is that we are not a monolith. We are, we have different life experiences. Many of us are not first generation college students. Many of us, we've just had different opportunities. Some of us have had amazing mentorship. Some of us have, had opportunities, that are different than others. I think about you and I being in this space right now. These are huge opportunities that many, of our colleagues and our peers have not had, and so I think we have to be just always mindful, too, that when we are talking about providing support, that everybody's need is going to be different. Mm-hmm. And I also, think about that. We can do so much more to support one another, and in our communities, and not waiting for, a European American to reach out and say, hey, this is what you need, or, to be an ally. We can be allies for one another and support one another. And I think sometimes, the way our society is, we kind of pit people of color against people of color, and like there's only space for one person at the top, and so instead of supporting one another, we kind of go in our silos, when we're successful over here by ourselves, but we don't really turn around and look and see how we can support one another, and how we can pull one another in, So one of the things that I have tried to do in every leadership position is find space for other Black and Brown and Indigenous individuals to come alongside.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's important that we remind ourselves. I'm glad you lifted that up so they can remind the audience, because we all have a role. We all have a role, whether it's to help lift up someone else who looks like you, or to be allies with others so that we can all work together, because we're still in this space called the world, right? And we're still in this space where what you can do can impact me. And unfortunately, we're in a space and time that we're still dealing with COVID-19. We're still dealing with mass shootings. And so we still have to begin to talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and sometimes break it down so that it's more than and it's addition to talking about the color of your skin, but also talking about the other issues of diversity, equity, inclusion that may be included when you talk about, mental health, leadership, advancing on the academia track, going in the mall or in the store, right, just to get groceries. So there's so many levels that we're called to lead and to inspire and to announce, interject diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's our role. And for many people, as I hear from you, it's kind of part of our passion about who we are. It's part of our identity. It's part of the legacy that we will leave.
Yes.
We will leave. As we begin to close up our time on perspectives, is there any final words or thoughts you want to share with our audience?
I would just say, that this work can be hard, that there are times when you do feel like you are kind of out there doing it by yourself, and, one of the things that I have learned through the years is that we have to reach out and ask for help and not feel as if, that makes you look like you're less than. I think a lot of times we don't say anything, and we will, just kind of in silence, struggle. And we need each other, going back to what we, just talked about, we need each other. And, like if there is anything that I can do to support you, like I want to be able to do that, and I think we have to be, willing to have those conversations where we can be vulnerable too with one another and say like, this is an area that I need support. Is there something you can do to, maybe help right here? Because that's how we grow as well. That's how we continue to grow. And that's for everybody, not just Black and Brown communities, but all of us that we don't, in silence, try to struggle through, but we actually reach out because mental health issues are abounding. People are struggling, psychologically with everything going on right now in our communities, that we really do need one another, So I think that's important. Sometimes I feel like we have, COVID happened, we kind of got back into the normalcy of life, the rat race. And no one has talked about the impact, the psychological impact that this has had, continues to have on our lives. And so we need spaces where we can heal and we can continuously heal, from everything that is, that we're dealing with in life. So
I love those final and closing words. Still connect, reach out, be vulnerable, and that we all still are healing and on that journey. So thank you again, Dr. Haskins, for being on Perspective. You are an awesome and just a stellar professional. I've enjoyed working alongside with you and watching you grow and excel and embrace other people. So thank you for being who you are. Thank you. And thank you for being a part of Perspectives.
Thank you for joining the American Mental Health Counselors Association podcast with President and Interim CEO/ED, Dr. Beverly Smith. We hope you will join us for the next episode to connect and hear the perspectives from experts and the organization that exclusively represent clinical mental health counselors. Be well.